Hello, again, I'm live here in Costa Rica. My name is Matt Rosenstiel. Muy buenos días, estoy aquí vivo desde Costa Rica. Soy Matt Rosenstiel. Este capítulo estoy dando información más relevante para extranjeros, entonces sí voy a hablar en inglés. Today I'll just be speaking in English because the video I'm posting is mostly relevant to foreign buyers. Costa Ricans usually have a good feel for the closing costs and commissions involved in a real estate sale here in Costa Rica. I'm broadcasting live from the office of Coldwell Banker Tamarindo Realty here in Tamarindo. So frankly, we could have any and all kind of interruption, and if so, I'll just pause the video and take any questions. But I wanted to get this video posted specifically for someone that had asked me about this topic this morning, and want to get this out there. So first, this northwestern province where we're located, and finally, it's for property done at a price under $500,000, normal non-luxury prices. There are other costs and other commission structures that you commonly see when prices get really high. So keep that in mind as I provide this information, and I'm willing and more than happy to hear any corrections, concerns, questions. Feel free to let me know. Without further ado, let's talk about closing costs for a typical real estate transaction in Costa Rica in this area for a normally priced property. Essentially, what you're going to be looking at is that the public notary fees, stamps, and taxes, everything that is actually associated with the closing of a real estate transaction, is going to cost 3.85% of the closing price. 3.85% is the basic number for most transactions where you're discussing simply the cost of actually completing the transaction. It's important to note that a public notary in Costa Rica is essentially an upgraded lawyer. You have to be a lawyer first and can become a public notary, and a notary will have to handle your transaction. So the public notary fee, which is a substantial portion of this 3.85% of the purchase price, is absolutely necessary in order for a public official to be able to handle your transaction. That 3.85%, there are multiple ways to handle it, and everything will depend on the contract you arrive at with between the buyer and seller. In many, many circumstances, you could say normally, but in lots of cases, you see this cost split exactly evenly between the buyer and seller, 50-50%. Again, that covers your public notary fee, stamps, taxes, essentially the paperwork that it takes to complete the real estate transaction. Now, this is one way to do things, and like I said, there are many ways to do things, and things will always change based on the area, the deal you reach for your transaction. For example, there are lots of places, or even other real estate brokerages that are highly reputable that do things a little bit differently than how I commonly handle real estate transactions. Oftentimes, you'll see that the 1.5% notary fee will be split and given only to the buyer, so that they have to cover that percentage, which is usually 1.5% of that 3.85 total percent, and then you just split 50-50 the remaining 2.35. Again, normally in many of my transactions and most of the transactions we handle here at Coldwell Banker, although there are exceptions always, you'll see a 50-50 split evenly of that 3.85%. However, at other places, sometimes you'll see that the buyer is given just, or is responsible for 100% of the public notary fee. Since, as we discussed, the public notary is the lawyer handling the transaction, and they're going to be usually selected by the buyer, where the buyer has the right to be the person that says, this notary has to handle the transaction. So The notary is, in a sense, representing the buyer and has their best interests at heart. And oftentimes, you will see that in setting up a closing, that 3.85% we talked about, instead of splitting it evenly, 50-50, the buyer pays the entire public notary fee, and the remaining 2.35% is then split evenly between buyers and sellers. Additional costs with a closing. So that 3.85% was the transaction cost for the lawyer, the stamps you have to pay, and the transfer tax. Additionally, if you want to use an escrow service for your transaction, which is highly recommendable, and there are great escrow services available, an escrow service is going to charge you, or at least the escrow service that I highly recommend, charges 0.25% of the total transaction fee plus $150 as a flat fee. This could vary. Obviously, there are going to be escrow services with different price structures, but the company that I'm working with is charging 0.25% plus $150. Again, remember the caveat that this is up to $500,000. Most escrow services are also going to have fees that increase with the price or complexity of the deal. And again, this is also for titled property. Keep that in mind just so that your expectations for costs are realistic. Finally, the buyers, if you're purchasing a property and you want to hold that property in the name of a corporation, the buyers outside of that 3.85% are going to also pay $800 to purchase a brand new corporation. Again, this could vary slightly. You see some lawyers that will sell you a corporation for $700. Others where corporations are more expensive. But in general, if you're buying a home property in Costa Rica, you can expect to pay about $800 for a corporation. Commissions, and again, let's remember that all of this is variable depending on the deal that you make, the contract that you sign for the purchase of your home. But in the vast majority of transactions here, the commissions are paid 100% by the seller, and it's something that they've set up with their real estate agent in their listing contract. Most often in this region, for the kind of transaction I'm talking about, under $500,000, you would see a 5 to 6% commission. Personally, I see more often 6%, and only in certain circumstances where there are repeated sales or a sales program that you get down to 5%. But that's going to be paid in almost every sale 100% by the seller. So if you're purchasing property, you don't have to be concerned. Every real estate agent in the country, if they are doing their job correctly and following Costa Rican law, is obligated to charge a 13% sales tax on their commission. That doesn't mean that the seller is paying 5 or 6% plus 13% for a total of 18 to 19%. What it means is that on the 5 to 6% commission that a broker is earning for the transaction, or that both brokers are earning, in the case where there's two agents involved in a sale, obviously if it were a 6% commission, the buyer's agent would get 3% and the seller's agent would get 3%. They are also obligated to charge 13% of the money they make, as just like you would add a sales tax to the purchase of anything in a store. So for example, if I'm paid $1,000 commission, I have to also charge that seller $130, or 13% of my $1,000, as a tax that I collect and pay to the government every month. If your agent is not doing this, then it's a transaction that isn't being executed 100% according to the letter of the law here in Costa Rica. So expect, if you're selling your property, to pay usually a 6% commission, sometimes a 5% commission, but also the sales tax added. In the case of the 6% commission, the total would be 6.78% after paying that tax, or in the case of 5%, you'd be paying 5.65 between both the commission and the tax. That's a quick wrap today. I wanted to be as easy as possible to give some quick digestible information. Remember, we talked about closing costs and commissions. We cited that for transactions that are in a price range below $500,000 for a titled property in this region of Costa Rica, what I most usually see and what you're going to be expected to pay is going to be a 3.85% total closing cost, which many times is split evenly between buyers or sellers, or in some cases split where the buyer pays 1.5% by themselves, and then the 2.35% is split up, the remainder. And we also discussed that real estate commissions in Costa Rica are most often either 6% or 5%. In many cases, almost all of the cases out there, it's going to be paid 100% by the seller, though you do see exceptions to the rule. Remember that 6%, for example, which is the most common commission we're seeing in the area lately for properties that are priced below $500,000, that 6% would be split evenly between two brokers if there were both a buyer's and a seller's agent involved, and that they would have to charge sales tax on top of that. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at matt@cbtamarindo.com. It's been a pleasure recording this video for you. I hope you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube, or follow us on Facebook if you're watching this on Facebook. Thank you very much and have a great day.